Welcome to Helping Organisations Thrive. Today I have the pleasure of Dr. Rana Al-Falaki. Good morning to you, Rani.
Good morning, and yes, you got it wrong after all that. It was Rana, but we joked that you would. You set the power of intention in your brain already, Julian, and
Yes,
there it goes.
indeed,
There it
indeed.
happened. Good morning.
Good morning. You are the co-founder of Nail It, a system that helps high achievers reach their professional goals while balancing life, relationships, and health. And we're going to talk about exploring sort of EQ, a little bit emotional intelligence, but how to regulate our emotions and what is the impact of our emotion on us and those around us. But before we get into that, I'd like to know, what do you love about what you do?
If I had to sum it up in one word, it's impact. And that's my deeper passion and my deeper purpose, in that everything I do in every part of my life creates an impact in some way. It's that ripple effect. You make enough of a plop in the water, then those ripples are going to be bigger and bigger. And I love witnessing, creating, witnessing, and working with that transformation that occurs when you can create impact with anybody and everybody and everything.
Fantastic. And I think it is all about impact. I think we need to be more mindful of our impact on others. And I think people forget, and it's a little bit what we're talking about, is the moment we, I suppose, enter a room or engage with somebody, we are having an impact. And it's being mindful whether that's a positive one or a negative one. And I guess be more aware of that. I want to almost flip what I've put down there, how to master your emotions in the workplace. Almost, what happens when we don't master our emotions in the workplace? What's the problem there? Why does it matter that we have to get our emotions in a good place?
Well, you just started on it, right? By talking about impact and what impact does that have on ourselves and on other people. I'd probably challenge you a little bit with the positive and negative, because the reality is when you're able to let go of emotions and therefore in many ways master your emotional intelligence, become more emotionally aware and really clever about what you do and how you do it, you become much more conscious. And when you do, that's about actually letting go of judgment and becoming more curious about everything. So actually nothing becomes positive or negative. It just is. And however it is, you can then determine how to deal with it. So if we apply that to emotions, then again, exactly the same thing. It's about becoming aware of your own emotions and not judging them. And I think particularly in the world of business, leadership, there's this idea of emotions being a little bit, oh, that's namby-pamby, and we don't need to think about that. But actually it's incredibly powerful. So to answer your question about what happens when we don't master our emotions, and there are thousands of studies to support this, we become less productive, less happy, less healthy, less curious, less creative. It has a huge impact on our professional relationships, our personal relationships, on our health, on our productivity, on our creativity, on our leadership, because of the impact that it has on everybody else around us in whatever way that happens to be.
And can we, I put the title there, Master Your Emotions. Can we truly master our emotions? Can we truly take control in that way? Because we always feel we can control things in life. And there's always that expression people say, you can only control yourself, but can we really control ourselves and how we react and respond to things?
Well, and in many ways, this is your internal and external locus of control. And actually, in mastering emotions, it is about understanding and accepting that you might not be able to control what's going on around you, but you can control yourself. And so, again, that mastering emotions is about shifting your emotional state about everything that's going on around you so that you can become more productive and more focused in what it is you're doing. And then to answer your question very specifically, absolutely, we can work on our own emotions. It starts with recognition. That's the first step. It's understanding that there is an emotion, and it's understanding that emotions are not the exact same thing to feelings. Feelings become the interpretation of the emotion. Emotions are simply data. That's all it is. It's data, and it's what you do with that data that determines how you behave, how you feel. And so really the most powerful leaders use that data, sort of sandwich between logical thought, feelings, intuition, but it is all about what do you do with that data in the first place, and recognizing why and where that data is coming from.
I've never heard it explained that way. I like the idea that almost the reframe of an emotion is data, which therefore creates there's some insight here. I can get some information from this. I could do something with this that would really help me. So how does what point, and this might be going sort of too sort of specific, what point does that emotion, that data, become the feeling, and what are we interpreting, and how do we not interpret the feeling as well as making clear about the data emotional piece? I'm talking lots of things that are probably not even making any sense as I explain it, as I was coming out of my head.
So what emotion are you feeling right now, Julian? Okay, right. Let's put it into a system, because that's what I love. I'm very, very logical, and I do love a system. So let's start with that recognition point, right? This is data. What emotion is showing up at this particular point in time? And remember that emotions can last long periods of time, or they can be microseconds. And if they're microseconds, they might come and go and that's it. But of course, if they linger, it's more of an issue. So the first step is really about recognizing that emotion. Where is it? And what can you understand about it? And when I say understand, it's about, right, how much energy is associated with this? So to put that into an example, if I'm really lethargic and I'm speaking really slowly, you might sense that I don't have I have low energy associated with it. On the other hand, if I'm speaking really quickly and in a loud voice, there's energy there, right?
Mm.
Now, at the moment, I'm not putting anything more onto that. But then if I speak really like this, and I'm really hyper, and I'm really happy, and I'm really excited, woohoo, let's go, versus, right, we got a deadline to work to, come on, let's do this. I'm still putting the same amount of energy in it, but one is more excitement and happiness, or joy, if you like, and the other one is a little bit more stress and anger, for example. So really, it's like, okay, so if we were going to plot this,
but is that just us, that interpretation of yourself, or is what other people are perceiving it?
That would be you. It's getting you to understand. Firstly, if you had to name your emotion, where would you place it on a grid that was based on energy and that was based on pleasantness? And of course, yeah, everything is your own interpretation of something, but there are some things that become, I mean, this is a whole other discussion about universal truth and your own truth, but those are pretty standard, right? Most people would interpret a voice or a mannerism or a body language that has low pleasantness and low mood versus something that has very high pleasantness and high mood. So the first thing is almost to plot this data. And the more data you plot, the more you then are able to understand about yourself. So the next step becomes understanding why that emotion is there in the first place. Is it something that's within your control, as you were talking about? That might simply be the whole hangry statement, right? I'm tired, I'm hungry, I've got personal issues going on, I'm in pain. This is this whole core dynamics in leadership that I also work with in terms of understanding your physical markers, your emotional markers, your social markers, what affects your ability to lead, but also then what affects your emotions in the first place. So sometimes you might simply understand it, and then it's a case of, right, I'll just go to regulating it straight away, in which case I'll have something to eat, or I'll make sure that I need to sleep, or I make sure I need to deal with the issue that's actually distracting me from doing what I actually really need to do effectively. So we have to recognize, plotting data, the more data we plot, the better. We have to understand, and then it's useful if you then label that emotion. But again, that's your own interpretation, because what you may see as chilled out or relaxed might not be somebody else's interpretation. but that depends on their emotions. I mean, how many times have we heard people say, oh, you seem a bit dim, or you seem a bit distracted, or, you don't seem to be totally in the room, and yet you can feel that you completely are. So it's not just about you. It becomes about, well, that's someone else's interpretation, which may also be on their own emotional state. So we have to understand it. Can we do something about it? And then we have to be able to express it, which is, of course, typically the hardest thing for leaders to do so often, because of this idea that, oh, emotions may not actually be that useful and are a bit on the soft side. But actually, why is it called the soft skills of leadership? But they're in fact one of the most powerful skills of leadership. So if you're able to express it, and again, learning the appropriate skills in communication, there are more optimal skills and ways of communicating depending on the people you're talking to and the circumstances. And that is, again, a whole other discussion about how you communicate. But we'll talk about needs-based communication, energy dynamic communication. Of course, there's verbal, non-verbal communication, multiple forms of communication, which we train people in. But communicating your emotions appropriately in the right way to get what it is you actually need. And then it's about the regulation. So the question to really ask yourself when this data drops in is, okay, the data's here. I'm experiencing this and therefore feeling this way. How useful is this
How do
right
we
now?
how do we sort of do that in the moment? Because things are happening so quickly, aren't they? And we're interacting with people, talking to people, wandering around the office or an interaction wherever we may be, and those things happen very quickly. How do we sort of create that space to almost reflect, I guess, on these moments?
The more you do it, the faster you'll get at it. It's this one of these pieces about self-awareness, because most of the time it's just invisible, right? You just are. Most people are behaving in a completely unconscious state. So this is about making yourself aware and choosing to recognize it. And that's why you're almost plotting it. You're plotting the data all the time, asking yourself, checking in with yourself. Start by asking yourself 3 times a day, what's going on for me right now? Or how am I feeling right now? Or what emotion am I experiencing right now? And the more data you plot, the more you'll start to notice. You might actually have a pattern. It may always be a particular way of feeling an emotional state in the morning or around certain people, and that will start to tell you what needs to happen as well. So it is just about it becomes about self-awareness, that emotions no longer become invisible because you become aware of them. You are in touch with a massive part of yourself that where previously there may have been a disconnect, which of course is another one of the reasons why we become so much more productive and more creative and have stronger, more effective, powerful relationships, both in the workplace and personally, because we start to get that sense of connection back. So the issue becomes about regulation. How useful is this emotion to me right now? If it is useful, great, go for it, carry on. If it's detrimental in some way, if it's blocking you in some way from achieving what it is you need to achieve at that particular point, then we need to talk regulation strategies. And you need to think, okay, well, what emotion would actually be more useful for me right now? I gave you that example of the, yay, let's go, high five. Well, that might be an emotional state you need to gear yourself up into if you've got a brainstorming meeting, or you've got a kickoff meeting, or you're off networking. Because when you're at a networking meeting, I mean, let's face it, who wants to talk to the person who's just coming across like this? It doesn't happen, right?
But how do we maintain? And I agree with you. I think that's sort of regulating your emotions to the context. How do we maintain that? I guess that authenticity piece where we're not sort of going high-fiving because that's what we are expected to do.
Yeah,
And
I mean, I'm using an extreme.
no, I appreciate that. And just because I know sometimes there's a perception that you should be, as a leader, and obviously there's always a perception that you should be more extrovert, and I disagree with that anyway. But there's sometimes a perception of that, and actually when you're in a conference or in a set, you've got to be all rah rah rah. But that might not be. You might not be rah rah rah. But how do you use those emotions that are still engaging an energy, but still you, and not sort of going beyond who you're not, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is about back to the plotting the data. You just have to shift yourself into an emotional state that is higher energy and more pleasant. That's the emotional state. How you then show up becomes the authenticity piece. It becomes actually about reflecting who you are, which is a whole different system about integrity. It becomes about reflecting your values, behaving in a conscious way that is true to you, uh, coming across with your desires, your wants, your own self leadership. Who are you? What do you want? How are you actually going to achieve it? Um, Demonstrating trust, making yourself approachable. Everybody will do that in a completely different way. But it is about being very true to yourself. Yeah. So I'm not a high fiver. We work with some big American companies, and in our initial training, it's like it's awesome. The number of times I've spoken it to audiences in America and then audiences in China, very, very different approaches, and yet they'll all come up to you independently and give you a huge amount of praise. But the emotions that are displayed in the room are seem to be very different. That's my interpretation. But it is about someone being their authentic self. I mean, I myself am an introvert. And most people get shocked by that, but that's just about where you gain your energy. When you can actually reflect who you truly are. Who are you? If you had to sum yourself up in 3 words, which is actually, it's also still relevant to emotional intelligence. It's one of the exercises we do about being able to just tap into your best self at any moment in time, which allows you to bring yourself back to yourself. If you had to think of your best self when you're showing up as your true self, bringing about what it is you need to bring about being the best and most effective leader you can possibly be, how would you describe yourself in just 3 words? And this is an exercise I'll do with teams where you just go into that state and allow those 3 words to pop into your head. Because when we're in a high emotional state, let's call it stress for now. Most of the time, so when we see red, it's very, very difficult for us to actually apply any logic or for us to get enough interpretation from our emotions at that point. So we talked about the need for self-awareness, extreme self-awareness, and it's like any other muscle. The more you do it, the more you recognize it, the more automatic it becomes because you get that sense of connection. But then if you have those 3 words to hand, again, it's just a regulation strategy that you can use to bring yourself back into the room and reflect your authentic self, your best self, your true self. And then you can apply, yes, the energy and the pleasantness, however you need to. But you're absolutely right. Every leader needs to be authentic. Again, these are all things that integrate. But the most effective leaders are, of course, authentic.
And what other strategies, we talked about stress moments or crisis moments, which is when emotions can go a bit haywire, and we know that when you're in emotional states and you're in your midbrain amygdala is going a bit wild, your clear thinking goes out the window. It's not very logical. How do we, in that moment, sort of regulate? How do we sort of, and also now there's practices that come in place, but what can we do when we get to that sort of moment of crisis and we want to get more into more of a logical way of thinking and manage those emotions?
It's the space, isn't it? Viktor Frankl summarizes it brilliantly, that it's the space between thought and action that all the power actually truly exists, and where we have that choice. And that space is less than a microsecond usually. But again, it really does come down to the need to make yourself self-aware, to become much more conscious. And then what do you do to regulate it? Everyone will have different regulation strategies to ground themselves once again. So if we are talking, say, stress, and how do people show up in stress? Actually, some people don't display. I put on that voice, didn't I, of someone being like angry and stressful. Not everybody does that. Everyone will back to the authentic piece, right? You could be really, really stressed. You could be high energy and low pleasantness, but doesn't mean you're shouting. It could be completely internalized within you. So what do you do about it? And again, depending on your emotional state, there will be different regulation strategies and strategies that will work for you. And sometimes you have all the time in the world to bring yourself back down, and sometimes in that second you've got to bring yourself back into the room. So of course it can be something as simple as taking a breath, which I know it sounds stereotypical, but the power of the breath is unbelievable. So it can simply be just stop for a second and take a breath. And then there are all different types of breathing techniques that can bring your emotions either up or down or ground you or connect you, which we don't have time to go into today. It could be the best self exercise, the fact that you've already know what those 3 words are. And through neuroplasticity, what you can do is you can train your brain to, the minute you think of those 3 words, it ends up converting into that sense of feeling your best self so that it gets displayed. Again, this comes with practice and exercise. It's literally like pushing a button in the brain, right? I'm going to think of peace and I immediately display peace. That takes time. But once you're able to do it, when you're in that red zone, you're not acting your best self, but you just find a couple of words that connect to it and you will start to behave that way. You may just look at nature. You may look out of the window. You may go for a walk. You may just have a phrase, a self-talk that you've decided to use in order to bring yourself back down. It may be championing yourself. It may be remembering somebody else's words. It may be some other kind of phrase that says, come on, you've got this. Again, as you're probably gathering, all of this comes with practice, right? Which probably comes back to where we were 20 minutes ago about, can you really master your emotional state and do you have control of it? Yes, it's a skill. It's just like working out in the gym. For me, I love hiking. For me, it's about taking one step at a time in front of the other. I've just hiked the Tour de Mont Blanc, like 120K in the space of 6 days, hut to hut. Would I have been able to do that without practicing and training? Absolutely no way. So emotional intelligence it's not something that just comes to us. And for a lot of people, it's not natural. But it does take practice. And yet every single leader is able to master it with the right type of training.
No, I totally agree. And I love those strategies in those sort of moments of crisis or stress points. I know for me, I revert to do gratitude because I know that will calm me down. It'll make me more positive, and walking in nature is a massive one for me as well. So I know when COVID happened, and it was all absolutely everybody was all going haywire, so we all were a little bit. And before I made any decisions on my business, personal thought, everything, I purposely held 3 days from doing that and just did walks for 3 days. I didn't make any decision because I knew I was in that stress. And at the end of the 3 days, I then was a bit more level-headed, or as best I could at that moment, and what I thought was good, and lots of gratitude. And that really helped me. And I think it's knowing yourself and what works for you. I think it's really important, and experimenting, isn't it? Trying things in those moments and thinking, actually, did going for a walk help for me, or looking out the window, did that help me, or doing breathing? And we're talking a lot about self-awareness here, a lot about being in touch with ourselves and our emotions and our thoughts and what's going on. What other practices can we do? Because it is about practice, it's about sort of, as you say, in terms of building that strength, that inner sort of strength of awareness, can we do on a daily or weekly basis that will sort of increase our self-awareness of ourselves?
So we've talked about obviously the emotions, right? Plotting your emotional state. But then if we go from feelings to behavior, right? So our thoughts and create our feelings, which then lead on to behaviors. So it can become conscious about your behavior. So one of the simple ways to do it, again, if we're trying to think about elevated states as well, let's mix this into feeling good too. Let's think about journaling, But I will often get clients to journal their wins, but never in list form. It's the same with gratitude, actually. You get by a lot of gratitude journals and they always say, like, list your 3 things. I try to avoid that because listing involves logical thought and we're talking about feeling good. So it's about a feeling state, right? So even with gratitude, I'll tell people to write it freely. Actually literally write, I am grateful for, and you just allow it to write yourself a paragraph, because that allows you to engage with the feeling. So it's the same with your wins, for example. So it becomes conscious about your behaviors that day. What went right for you? What didn't go so well for you? Notice my language there. We're not talking right and wrong. It's just, things that what could you have done better? How might you have behaved differently? Should you have the time again? I sometimes get clients to write a judgment journal, because actually judgment is a massive, massive drain on our energetic
A
state.
judgment journal. Tell me about a judgment
Yeah,
journal.
and on our emotional state, right? Because when we're judging everything, our emotions are often very negative, and it will drain us. And actually, the least effective leaders are often judging or trying to control and fix too much. So a judgment journal may be something. Again, I will always get clients to decide what works for them best. But if I give you a typical, it may simply be literally becoming aware of every time they judge something. They'll write it down and then have to then note down what impact that judgment actually had on them and how they felt, on their performance. So again, thinking about the productivity or the conversations they had or the relationships that had then ensued, and then again, what they might have done differently. So again, this becomes a self-awareness piece, right? Because judgment, again, it's back to becoming conscious of your behavior. You're not aware that you're doing it until you bring it to the fore. So journaling allows us to connect that behavior. It's very, very powerful. It's something I will often do very early on in the process with leaders and companies, because they don't realize they're doing it. So it's a huge element of self-awareness. And back to this idea of your wins and celebrating your wins. So often when we're feeling a bit rubbish, we can't tap into everything that we achieved that was actually really good that day. So I couple that up with gratitude in terms of, okay, what were your wins today? And a win could be something as simple as a conversation that looks like it's going somewhere. Because again, when we're in that stress state, it can be very challenging to really focus on what went right. It's the way our human brain is always programmed. It thinks of what didn't go so well versus actually what went well. And you want to focus on what went well, because that's something you can then develop to be an even more effective and powerful leader. So again, they're regulation strategies, right? But they're more long-term ones as opposed to ones that you do in that particular moment. But they are all about building self-awareness.
Yeah, interesting that judgment piece. When you are judging somebody, there's a lot of negativity that comes with that, doesn't there? And you feel it. And I know when I've been in conversations with people, and we not talking about people, but there's a judgment conversation going on. I can feel this energy drain going, and I either remove myself from that, or I then change the narrative to make it, let's think about something a bit more encouraging, positive, and actually then start to lift the energy, because there's nothing worse than that judgment conversation, isn't it? It's very negative.
Absolutely. And let's think about, if we bring this back to emotions again, I would always encourage you to not judge your emotions, to actually, let's be a scientist about this. Because a lot of people, like I said, there is no right and wrong. And so actually, if you want to be your most authentic self, you just have to allow that emotion to be, rather than thinking, oh, this is bad, so I'm going to act this way. And to be the scientist about your emotions, to just accept that it just is what it is. I'm not going to label it right or wrong. I'm not going to judge it. I'm going to be open and curious about it. I'm going to express understanding about it. So if I'm curious, I'm more able to do something about it without it then impacting on me in a destructive way.
Yeah, it's almost I do a lot of with clients almost ask the question, what's the wisdom in that emotion? What's the wisdom in the situation? Almost to try and galvanize, get some information from it, almost, and rather than just get the feeling, but ask the question, and actually almost takes it out of yourself anyway, which helps you regulate your emotion actually by asking you the question, what's the wisdom in this moment? I've just lost a client or whatever it may be, rather than being all frustrated or sad or getting stress. Actually, what's the wisdom? And that's, there might be something in it, and that sort of almost regulates your emotions as well, doesn't it?
Very much so, because it does. It just brings you back into yourself. And of course, they're often longer term strategies, aren't they? Again, as we become more conscious, we're able to shift into that state much more easily. We can shift into opportunity. We can thrive from failure. We learn from our failures. Are there actually really any mistakes? One of my lines there: nothing is ever a mistake. Everything is a learning opportunity. What can you learn from it?
Mm,
What can you shift? How can you change? What can you make? What can you do differently next time? But it is all about shifting into opportunity. And again, when you're in a stress state, that can be very, very challenging to do. But it's for I have an assessment that we do that measures these states amongst leaders. And again, the more conscious you become, the more you're
mm,
able to get into that. What's the opportunity? What's the wisdom? What's the learning here? Even when you're in stress, not just when things are going for you. So can you imagine how beneficial that would
mm,
be to be able to bounce back from failure, from hardship, from difficulty, from challenges that quickly in a state of stress? That
mm.
really does make the most powerful leaders.
Yeah, absolutely. As we finish, Rana, what's your final thoughts on how we should master our emotions within the context of workplace, or actually in all our lives, really? This is not just in the workplace, it's in our personal lives as well.
Yeah, it's understanding that, again, it's back to that impact piece, right? Nothing is in isolation. Our work, our emotional state at work will often come home with us. Our emotional state around anything personal or our health will often come into our workplace, and as we've said, impact on exactly how we perform. So the final thing I think is remembering that impact, and again understanding that you have choice and you do have control. So every single thing that you do, every thought that you have,
Mm.
every feeling, every behavior, ultimately is a choice, and choose well.
Well, thank you for your time today. I really appreciate your insights and your examples. If people want to sort of connect with you, get in touch with you, what's the best way of doing that?
The best way, actually, my main function is through WhatsApp. So if you send me a WhatsApp on the mobile number 07812 595 264, or you can email inspire me at nailit, NAIL hyphen IT.UK.
Well, thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much, Julian. Thank you.